I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my True Crime Report. So today I was in court for day 4 of Ghislaine Maxwell's hearing, and with me is Addy Adds of the Addy Adds YouTube channel. You have the Epstein Files podcast, and one more. What did I miss?
Yeah, and then I got my public intelligence podcast that I run, which kind of is a spin-off of or connected with my book that I wrote, which I published in May of this year, called Public Intelligence: The Rise of Synergistic Truth. And yeah, that's probably the spark notes of what I've been doing.
What is synergistic truth?
Synergistic truth, I kind of define as the synergy whereby the whole is greater than the sum of all the parts, and you get people like you and myself and other independent or non-independent reporters, investigators, reporters, journalists, writers, etc., trying to find out what the truth is. And in the era we find ourselves now, the loss of trust in the mainstream media is very much immediate, and it's been collapsing for a couple of years now. So it's my contention that working together with other people, because there's only so many man hours in a day or woman hours for one person. But if you get 20 or 30 people, and I can go on for a while about it, but there's many aspects to it. People like you and I, writers, and a big player in public intelligence and synergistic truth is the audience, because there's so many great citizen researchers out there as well, which I'm sure you're well aware of, Roberta.
Yeah, and this is a trial. I was talking to the security guard, and this is a trial with tremendous public interest. He told me that the first day people were waiting outside, and it is not today, but Monday it's been absolutely freezing in New York, and people were waiting outside at midnight on Sunday to get into trial, which I don't know any other trial that's been like that in New York in my lifetime that would have people waiting in the cold, freezing cold, uh, overnight, sleeping out overnight to get in. What do you think? And I'm getting a lot of comments that, well, there are no pictures, there are no there's no pictures of her arrest. There's no pictures of her in jail. There's no pictures of her coming to court. And of course, because it's a federal trial, there's no video. Is this really Ghislaine that we're looking at in court? Or is this a double? What do you say? Are you getting those same kind of comments?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I didn't go as far as to say that, but I was very suspicious of the fact that there was no mugshot, and on top of that, no video. But I guess that's the norm for federal trials. Whereas, for example, the Rittenhouse trial was the state prosecuting, and yeah, I've definitely got not just viewers and supporters, but people I work with as well who've contended that, some far more than others, where they contend that for sure it's a clone or a body double. But I did see her face yesterday. She took off her mask to drink some water, and
Mm-hmm.
immediately I jumped up and rushed up to the screen, and I looked really close. And I do have to say, if I'm going to put a feather in my cap here a second, I'm quite good with faces, and I could tell that was Ghislaine Maxwell. So on top of that, why would her sister be showing up to support a fake, right?
Good point. Her sister's there, her brother's in trial. And then the other thing I hear a lot is that this is a show trial, and of course she's going to walk. But wouldn't they just not arrest her if they wanted to do I mean, it seems like a lot of effort is going into if they wanted to put on a show trial. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think what I would say to that, Roberta, is perhaps the only reason Ghislaine Maxwell is on trial right now is because of the public demand for it. I
mm,
remember Eric Weinstein last summer, and that was big. I was like, I almost got chills when I saw that. He's like, "Where is she? Why can't we call up Interpol? Can't they figure out where she is based on her passport? This shouldn't be difficult." And even a guy like I think it was Nick Bryant last year, he said, the FBI could track down Ghislaine Maxwell in 4 hours if they wanted to. But it seemed that the public was so interested in this. And I'm sure you remember, I don't know how long you've been following the Epstein case, but it was like every scrap of info going back to late 2019, early 2020, people were just starving for, right? And they were just, saying almost nothing, but they, it was after a while they had to say something because everyone was so interested in it. If they didn't, it would just make it look so obvious that they were, you know, seemingly trying to put this to bed. So yeah, I think that's what I would respond to that. But as far as a show trial, I've had many people contend that as well, and I'm trying to remain neutral on this, Roberta. As I report, I
Mhm,
try to
mhm.
not enter into situations with my opinion already set. Trying to suit. Uh, Making facts suit theories, and you try to look at the facts and then get the theory instead of coming forward with a theory and picking
Mhm.
the facts that suit, like a confirmation bias, right? Cognitive bias. So that's what I try to do. But again, that's as a reporter that I try to have that as part of my work ethic. But as far as the show trial goes, why, and this is a point I made too, and other people have made, is where are the other co-conspirators? We heard today, or it
Mhm.
was yesterday, this Sophie, who's really Sarah Kellen Vickers,
Mhm.
married to Brian Vickers, the NASCAR driver, was
Mhm.
an adult, a woman, when she was partaking in these. No, I don't want to get your channel. Uh, in trouble or anything, but these group, these massages, quote unquote, people
Right.
don't know what that
Right,
means.
sure. Yeah. And also she was booking these people. She was her assistant. And when they keep putting up this picture of Sarah Callan, and we'll go into Ghislaine Maxwell's instruction book, but every time I look at that picture of Sarah Callan, she's in this bright green, very low, but not too low V-neck dress, and she looks just like Virginia Roberts in the Prince Andrew photo. It's like she's sexy but not slutty. And I wonder if there was a way that Maxwell trained these women and girls to dress so they look a little like the girl next door, but a little
Mhm.
bit, but still sexy. Did you have that? Did you think about that at all when you look at her picture? Because it's been put up like now at least 4 or 5 times, at least in court.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I would contend that maybe because you're a woman, you kind of saw that angle. I never thought about it that way.
You're like, I'm a man. Don't ask me about her dress. But yeah, that's what I was thinking about. But today, so yesterday, I was unfortunately at the dentist, but I'm back. And what I heard was, I thought Tuesday the prosecution took a bit of a dive and got a bit beat up. But I heard they got super beat up. You weren't in court either. Just a recap: Jane got cross-examined and they brought
Mm,
up discrepancies in her FBI statements. Why didn't you mention that Maxwell was there? You said she wasn't there at first. And today, first, we had probably the most boring witness of all, very quickly. Paul came, who was the
mm,
professional children's school where Jane went, and it was in New York City, which was paid for by Epstein. He was there to testify for very, very quickly that on Jane's application, Epstein is listed as the financier, and the defense objected, and Lisa Bloom, Allred's daughter, was sitting next to me, and she stood up and she explained it to the entire overflow room, and she said what this was about was that this was a documents can be called hearsay unless they're business documents. What the defense was saying,
mm.
because this application was handwritten by Jane or Jane's mother, who
Oh,
knows,
sure, sure.
it's hearsay. And Lisa Bloom correctly predicted that the judge would let it in, and she did. So it backs up what Jane's saying. Then they brought on the expert in child sexual abuse,
Yep.
Lisa
Lisa Rocchio. Yeah.
Rocchio, thank
Yep.
you. And she's a clinical forensic psychologist,
Mm,
PhD, long list of very impressive. And she went through these stages of grooming.
Yep. Yeah.
And boy, I mean, if that did you think of Michael Jackson at all when you were listening? Did you see
I actually
Leaving
didn't, but
Never?
I've seen other people mention the guy from Slate wrote about that. You just briefly mentioned
Oh,
Michael
really?
Jackson, but why did you think of Jackson? Just because of the
It's his MO is being described, his modus
mm,
operandi is being described exactly in this trial.
yeah, and
For one,
what Rockio basically was doing was it
mm,
was quite academic. You know, she was explaining the grooming process,
mhm,
going through definitions of child sex abuse in general, and I thought the most powerful or pertinent to this trial definition that she shared was the delayed disclosure concept,
yes.
whereby sex abuse victims and especially child sex abuse victims often will wait quite a long time before telling anyone about their abuse, let alone law enforcement, who is usually the last to know. Which is another fact she brought up, and why that's relevant is because one of their main strategies seems to be poking the holes in the memories of Jane, and I'm sure other witnesses will experience that as well. Which is why they plan the defense, that is, to bring in their own psychologist, Elizabeth Loftus, who's a memory expert and who's going to
Mhm.
testify for Maxwell about quote unquote false memories of sexual abuses. And her rap sheet is pretty impressive here, Roberta. You got to listen to this.
Yeah,
It's
I'm very familiar with Loftus. I've done a whole
yep,
thing on the horror. She's a
yep,
demon, in my opinion, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
yep.
And I also have a playlist up of her
Oh,
getting
excellent.
destroyed in Cross and Durst's trial. And
Yep.
she's also
Wow.
very connected with the Innocence Project, which is one of my nemesis.
Okay,
So
I'm not familiar with the Innocence Project.
Innocence Project, yeah. So it's basically like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, but for murderers and rapists. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, like
in
Harvey
some ways,
Weinstein, Scooter Libby, Ollie
right,
North, Ted Bundy, the police
right,
officers who beat up Rodney King. Of course, you mentioned Robert Durst, and then the McMartin preschool child sex abuse trial over in
right.
California as well. So it's like, it's like a who's who of the worst people in the most famous trials of like the last, what, 20, 30 years or so.
And yeah, and so I was sitting next to Lisa Bloom and being completely starstruck, and I brought up Loftus to her, thinking that she was a lawyer and she would be very reverential. And she said, "Oh yes, I have had her as an expert witness and cross-examined in her trials." And she just had a little bit of her sort of like that. How would you describe it? Like her, like a little bit like the nostril moves up a little bit, just very slightly, like a disgusted look on her
Contempt.
face,
Yeah.
contempt for her.
Mhm.
And I said, she's a demon. I mean, she's just a horrible person. And so, as the expert went through, she said they select victims, they isolate them, they use lies, deception, and manipulation
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
keep it going. They desensitize them to sexual content and sexual touch, and then they control to continue to abuse. And this is exactly what Jane described. And when the
Mhm.
defense, so let's go into let's. I'm so glad you're familiar with Loftus. Let's go into the defense's cross. So the
Sure.
defense tried to, and this is a defense attorney I hadn't seen yet, Mr. Palucia.
Oh, that's Polyuca.
Thank
It's
you.
also Italian.
I have to have you on all the time just to pronounce the names with my horrible pronunciation. Yeah, and he was and he kept trying to sort of put Loftus's theories on this expert witness. Like, couldn't
Mm.
these memories be corrupted? And the
Mhm.
prosecution objected very successfully to a lot of that. Um,
Yeah, I think so too. Just an example, kind of a micro example of that was the discussion where they had about the time period that Jane met Epstein and Maxwell. And the reason for that is because I guess when she spoke to I think it was the FBI in 2019, she said it was 13. And then later she said it was 14. But she has a summer birthday. And so I think she was at a summer camp, so she was both 13 and 14 during that camp during that
Mhm.
time period that and I believe she couldn't exactly remember what if it was before or after her birthday. So I recall that being kind of the rebuttal there, at least implicitly. So
Mhm, and Virginia, Roberts had a similar problem with her memory. I think she remembered her being 16 when she met Epstein and Maxwell, and it was actually 17 in those, and they just tried to exploit the hell out of that in if you've read the depositions of, I think it's in the legal filings, between Maxwell and Virginia Roberts Giuffre.
yeah, I've read
Maxwell
that
was
once.
trying to exploit the hell out of that. She got she was off by a year. It just seemed like hold your horse's defense. Wait your turn. You'll have your time to bring it. And then he brought up Park Dietz, which is their other expert witness. Well, and she even made it clear that this grooming could not predict child abuse. And then he asked her,
Right.
well, in her testimony, and then he goes, well, this is not predictive. And he mentioned a John Jay college study. Was this a successful cross, do you think? Obviously, my opinion is kind of obvious, but.
Yeah. Well, I think from the beginning of this trial, Roberta, the defense has a big uphill battle to go,
Mhm.
and they do kind of seem to be grasping at straws here. But I'm a little bit more confused with the prosecution in the way they're approaching this. It's a little bit confusing for me. Again, this is my first trial, but uh, the other thing that was weird was the fact that the defense brought up the big names first, like Clinton, Trump, and so on. You would think they
Prince
would have,
Andrew.
yeah, Andrew, of course. Uh, why would they do that? You would think they would try to avoid that, if anything. Is
Well,
kind of confusing.
my theory was that they were trying to say, look who my client hung around with. She is a
Hmm.
respectable citizen. And I I thought Everdale, the former prosecutor, did a great job in Cross in making Maxwell look great. So
When Everdale was cross examining who again?
Cross who was he cross examining? He was cross examining. Hold on one second. I will tell you. Um, It was the pilot, Larry
Oh yeah,
Vasosky, and
Vasasi. Yep.
he said, "Oh, you know, you had your daughters around Maxwell. You
Yeah.
would have never done this had you thought that she was abusing children."
Yep.
But so we also we let's go into very delightful. I thought and I think the prosecution to me looks disorganized. They look young. They look intimidated. This defense team is so big they can't even fit at their desk. They
Yeah.
have to kind of sit behind each other in rows. There's not enough
That's.
room.
I think that's a good observation, Roberta. There is quite a bit of age difference between the the prosecution and the defense. And I was talking about it with I mentioned it. I was just on John Kiriakou and Lee Stranahan's radio show before we did our show here. We're doing our show, and yeah, I mentioned that as well.
Yeah, they and also money difference too. I mean,
Sure,
I
sure.
wonder what Maxwell is spending on this defense. I mean, she's got Bobby Sternman, no matter whatever you think of her. These are no small
Fish.
defense lawyers. These
Yeah.
are really established, really expensive, and I think they're doing the best. They're surprising me. I thought that they
Yeah.
would just sort of tank and not make. They've scored points, and I've had the frightening thought that Maxwell might walk. Have you,
Yeah,
do you-
it's what's funny about that is I read and lost my train of thought there for a second, but it does seem like they're really playing up the antagonistic, villainous defense, role a little bit. But
how so?
just kind of how the way I don't know. I mean, again, this is my first trial, but just the way they are carrying themselves a bit. I mean, obviously they're pretty harsh on Jane there, but I saw Vicky
Also,
Ward contend that too, that she thinks Maxwell may walk, but I don't know. I mean, it's really tough to say, Roberta. It really, a lot of it rests on your faith in the judicial system, of which I don't have a whole lot. You know, just going back to the lack of co-conspirators being indicted or even questioned in this case is really befuddling to me. It does seem like they are trying to offer Maxwell's head on a platter, so to speak. But it's interesting to see because we're still pretty early in this process.
I think it's just very hard to prove. Sometimes you can say that these people are there. Can you prove
Hmm.
what they know, what they saw? How many other people can you prove? If you have, you one witness to prove that Sarah Kellen was involved might not be enough. How many witnesses do you have?
Hmm.
And do they have the money? And the prosecution is we'd like to think of the man as so powerful, but in the time, they're already so overworked. We like to think that if you break the law, you're going to be prosecuted, but I agree.
Right.
I think also what you're really hinting at is that this was a massive network of, uh, that went on for decades. And where is
Yeah.
everybody else? Where is
That.
everybody else? And it feels in the outrage that Epstein was either killed or killed himself, but died before he could face justice, is real
Hmm.
justice, is and why he was allowed that sweetheart deal in
Yeah.
Florida.
Yeah.
The only positive has been that Prince Andrew has really answered Virginia Giuffre, Roberts Giuffre's lawsuit. And I thought he would just ignore it and never come to America. So that's been very exciting to see.
Yeah.
Do you think he could? I think he's above the law. What do you think?
I agree. I think Prince Andrew is definitely above the law. That being said, I don't think he's going to come to the United States anytime soon. Uh,
Never.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are people that are, that's what I think this case is largely about in many ways is, are these people truly above the law, bar none, or can we at least take some of them down? And it's interesting going from, because Epstein and Maxwell were kind of joined at the hip a bit, but Maxwell had seniority in that relationship. But are they going to go up or down in terms of the hierarchy? And what I mean by that is, are they going to go after Wexner next, who would be going up the ladder, or are they going to go down the ladder to Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Nadia Marchinkova,
Hmm.
uh,
Good point.
Claire Hazel, Eileen Guggenheim?
Who
That would,
who who do you think who's more criminal? Is Les Wexner more criminal or is Sarah Kellen more criminal in your opinion?
more guilty in this
Guilty,
particular operation.
criminally liable for these crimes against children.
Sure, sure. I would say Wexner, just because he's much more powerful. He's been called the head of the snake of this operation, at least in the United States. And he seemed to be the source of Epstein's money, which I think it was you that mentioned to me today, which is a great question I've heard asked before as well by a couple smart people, is where did he get his money? Who was financing this guy? Uh, Certainly some sort of shadowy entity. And the other
Right.
thing too, which I think people need to realize is, you don't blackmail really powerful, more than likely sociopathic businessmen unless you have a really powerful entity to ensure those guys don't send their own goons after you.
Good
So
point.
who is this organization that can put the fear of death in these really, really powerful people, men and women, such that they know, well, I probably should listen to what Epstein is telling me to do, not only because he has video of me with a child, but also because I know he has the ability to carry out his threat in a way that I can't respond to, even though I'm a multimillionaire or a billionaire or extremely powerful, such that I can afford to hire mercenaries, assassins, etc. So what entity was that? I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, but also our media is a little complicit too, because you go back to Acosta saying, well, I had to sign off on this Florida deal, this sweetheart deal that Epstein got,
Mhm.
because I was told that it came, the commands came from higher up. Where is our press asking him who's higher up? Who's higher up than you, Acosta? Are you talking about the CIA? Are you talking about the Mossad? Are you talking about the FBI? Are you talking
Yeah.
about who are you
Yeah.
talking
Well,
about?
there's
Who
I think
told?
two aspects to your question there. In terms of the AG, the national or federal AG at the time was Alexander Mukasey,
Mhm.
but as you are, I think, referring to or implying is Acosta also mentioned. I think the quote was, "I was told he belongs to intelligence, and that's above my pay grade," and that's from the AG of
Is
Florida.
that the
So,
quote? Is that the quote? So I'm
uh,
misremembering the quote, you think? So that he belongs to intelligence. So what kind of intelligence? Why
right,
isn't where is our freaking press on this? Why aren't they
yeah.
seeking him out?
Yeah, and that's something too that almost nobody in the mainstream media, as you just mentioned, I don't think any of them have mentioned the intelligence connection, which we have, testimony of from the freaking former AG of Florida there with Acosta,
He's
and not to mention even I would say independent reporters, a lot of them miss that aspect, and to the point where even the ones that do, they argue about, okay, is it the CIA or is it the Mossad? So it's almost a question of who's more powerful in the United States, the CIA or the Mossad? I think most people would say the CIA,
Mhm.
but that's not to say they don't allow the Mossad to do things in our country. Uh, and there is overlap in these intelligence agencies going back to World War II, which I read about in my first book. The U.S. government, was working with Nazi intelligence before the war was even over, like Reinhard Gehlen and Klaus Barbie, the torture specialist Butcher of Lyon. So that overlap hasn't, I don't think, has ever gone away. Uh, so
We
you have,
brought in all these Nazi doctors, and yeah, we
mhm,
have there's definitely a dark history uh, with that. And the other question is, the other interesting thing about the story is the public seems shocked that this pedophile, and what you see in this trial is the wealth. Today we saw the floor plans of his Palm Beach house. He's he's got a steam room, double showers. Just this is just multiple buildings, acres and acres of space on the New Mexico ranch. Just
mhm,
seven a 727 plane. I mean,
yeah.
this is just the kind of wealth is so absurd.
It's hard, and I would say for a lot of people, almost impossible to even comprehend and fathom the level of wealth these people had and still do have. As you mentioned, Maxwell's pockets are as deep as anybody's who would be on trial, right? So she's. And speaking of that, I had read that she had the whole floor in the prison cell to her, or in the prison to herself, because as it pertains to child crimes against children, prisoners don't tolerate that. They bad things happen to say. I'm going to quote Sean Atwood here, who's a fantastic interviewer, podcaster. He's done great work on the Epstein saga, and that's uh, there is no mercy for sex offenders in prison, and that goes for female sex offenders too. They do not get tolerated by the inmates. So I
Well,
think
Sean
that was
should
part
know
of it.
because he's been in prison.
Yeah.
He's a convict himself. So to get let's go back to what happened when Juan, the Ecuadorian older man now,
Mhm.
um, it was hard to tell what his position was. First, he started out as a contractor, but it seemed like he worked doing everything, chauffeuring. Uh, Sometimes he made breakfast if it was at 5 in the morning, even though Epstein and Maxwell traveled with a private chef on their planes. He washed the dog. I mean, basically was like, people were calling him the Butler, and this was one. I think it was the journalist from the BBC said, the theme of this testimony is what the Butler saw, and
Sure. The butler actually was Alfredo Rodriguez. He was the one who tried to sell the Black Book
right.
to I think it was Virginia Roberts' lawyers, who then brought that to the FBI. And
Did he commit suicide or did he die?
he
Wasn't
died under, I would say, pretty suspicious circumstances. I think Joseph Recarey also died, who was the detective in Florida who was kind of leading the initial investigation back in the day.
Wow. Well, I hope some people like you really dig deeper into some of these coincidences or patterns after, and keep on this story, because we still know so little. And basically, he was saying that he left when Maxwell took over the house. It became insufferable. She had this book where she put in the daily duties, and it was 58 pages long, at least the most recent one. He thought the first copy that he saw was maybe 30 pages long. He left in 2002. His wife worked there, and she wanted them to basically put the printer in, get certain notepads, one that said Lady Ghislaine, different size notepads. They wanted them in certain places, and they always wanted their phone books, these organized phone books, all around to the right of the bed in the offices. These phone books were bound like a book, bound like a hardback. It was soft cover, but it looked soft cover, but it was like a bound book of phone numbers, of masseuses, quote unquote. And I think the most devastating testimony. Oh, and one of the instructions was, don't look. He had been friends with Epstein, but when Maxwell came along, Maxwell told Juan not to look Epstein in the eye anymore, to only speak when spoken to, and to see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing was the most important. And she just basically had these rules like they were celebrities. What do you think? Was that about the abuse? Was that just more of a abuser's need to control and dominate? Or what do you think those all those instructions were about?
Sure, sure. Well, Maxwell is a very dominant woman. Her psychology is very dominant, and I think, moreover, these people, they believe themselves to be better than everyone else, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think there might even be Maria Farmer's testified to the fact that there was this country club. I don't know if it was in Ohio or where it was exactly. I want to say it was, but don't quote me on that. And if you weren't a particular identity or demographic, you were not allowed in the country club, and that demographic is the one that Maxwell and Epstein are
And me
part
and
of.
Jewish. Are you talking about Jewish? Yeah.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
I want to kick Epstein and Woody Allen. We need to kick these Jews out of the Jew club because they're giving us a bad name. I say, go ahead.
well, yeah. I
So
mean,
they had like a Jewish sort of country club. Are you saying in Columbus, Ohio, where Wexner is?
I want to say it was in Columbus, but again, don't quote me on that. But yeah,
Okay.
that's what Maria Farmer said. That Maxwell said that you're not allowed. I don't know if it was to Maria or to somebody else, but basically, you're not allowed to go there because you're not Jewish. So I think that played a part of it too. And again, there could be who's wagging the tail there. Is it they're saying that because they just think they're superior anyway, and they just so happen to belong to that demographic. But regardless, the point is they're
But Maxwell's
narcissists.
mother isn't even Jewish. So I mean, so like my mother isn't fully Jewish, so there's a lot of Jews who would say she's not even Jewish because of that. It goes through the mother. So it's interesting
Sure.
that she so identifies with her father and that she's taken on that persona. She's certainly not
Yeah.
Jewish
Well,
enough for some really strict Jews.
yeah, I've heard that. It's yeah, you need to be, through your mother, but
Fully
sh she
Jewish through
was
your mother.
she was Bob Maxwell's favorite child.
Mm,
She was the youngest. He named his yacht after her, the Lady Ghislaine, which is the one that the Mossad assassinated him in because of his financial disaster that he got himself into, and more or less trying to strong arm the Mossad. And he was using his companies. It was his media publishing companies. He was using the employees' pensions to, help try to pay his debt back to the banks. And it was some $400 million that they owed the banks. And so the sons, Ian and I can't remember Ian's brother's name. They had to deal with that after their father died. But yeah, Ghislaine was always, I think, his favorite child. So she really, as you kind of implied there, she really identified with her father. I think a lot more so
mhm.
than her mother.
Yeah. So it went on like that. We the with the telephone directories. What happened after I had to leave a little early? Did they cross-examine him strongly?
I actually left very shortly after you did as well because
Okay.
I had to get on Lee Stranahan and John Kiriaku's show. I wanted to make sure I had my eggs in order for that. But yeah, so that's where I was. I was at there. But you're going tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I'll go
Okay,
tomorrow and I'll fill you in on what happened in the last 40 minutes that I missed. Um, I can't go home at 5 o'clock. It's just it's a madhouse to try to
sure.
get and do this. So do people have questions for Addy or myself? How
Oh, I
do you
love
join?
Q&As. That's like one of my favorite parts about live streaming. That's why I was so devastated when I lost my big channel last year. It was about the same size as yours. I think yours is a little bigger than mine was. But, that's like almost a year that's gone by. It's like how much growth would have happened if I had that. But yeah, that's one of my favorite aspects of doing this type of work is connecting with the audience because the collective kind of crowdsourced public intelligence, it's something that one man or woman can't match. You got all these great citizen researchers, many of them anonymous, who just put in their own intelligence and their own research findings and makes our work a lot easier. So yeah, I really love that about this work.
Lone gunman, you got an invitation from me. I'll take you into the Jew club. I'll take you to Katz's Deli. You can get a pastrami sandwich, and we can talk about. We can tell you about the good Jews. You can meet some good Jews. I think there's just so few besides New York City. There's so few, and I wonder if this trial and is creating more anti-Semitic Jew hatred. Okay. Um,
Sure.
um,
Yeah, it's a valid question. I don't know if it's early enough to say. It certainly hasn't been brought up in the trial, but that's something the media doesn't really talk about. But looking at Western media in general, it's very. I think you can't analyze this without looking at the relationship between the United States and Israel and how kind of attached at the hip they are. You have this really tiny country in the Middle East that has enormous influence over U.S. foreign policy and
mhm.
Congress to the point where Trump recently said that I think they owned a fair share of Congress. And I think this is a connection that people should make because it wasn't just Epstein blackmailing people for science secrets, right? Because there were
Mhm.
scientists there, but it was also, it was all of it. It was government officials, celebrities, and I thought it was kind of ironic that I think it was yesterday outside the courtroom. I want to say it was on the ninth floor. I could be wrong. It might have been on the fifth floor, but there was a picture of John Roberts, Supreme Court Justice Roberts, and there was a name on the Lolita Express flight log, and the name was John Roberts. And I've only seen a few people, as far as the bigger names, cover it. Lynn Wood actually tweeted about that earlier this year before his Twitter account got terminated.
Well, there's been people also like Arnon Milchan, who's a film producer, who was trading arms to the Mossad, or for the Mossad, selling arms to the Israel. And was
Okay.
Mossad, and he got Sidney Pollack, also actor director, who's in Eyes Wide Shut, into selling arms. And it's just like this little blip that nobody ever talks about. How many people are selling arms for other countries, including Israel? Like, what the heck is going on? It's just like these little parts of an article, and you kind of go, what? He got Sidney Pollack into like this multi-millionaire film director / actor needs to sell arms on the side. And that's the other thing about Les Wexner is, why is this rich guy? Rich people do not like to give away their money. Why is he giving Epstein this townhouse? Why is he giving him this? We heard about this Cobra
Yeah,
car that he
it's a
gave
great question.
Epstein.
Yeah.
I understand that Epstein provided children to a lot of people, but a lot of rich people. Prince Andrew wasn't saying, here, have part of the castle, Balmoral or whatever. What was going on there, do you think? Or can you even speculate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Is why? Because Wexner gave Epstein power of attorney over his finances. So it begs the question: if Wexner was the head of the snake in the United States, why did he do that? That's enormous power and trust to just hand over to someone you're not even related to, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that's one of those aspects of this case that not the trial per se, but this whole saga that is a bit confusing. But I actually mentioned this. Actually, Mr. Kiriakou brought it up. John Kiriakou brought it up in the show we just did with him and Stranahan. Was that Epstein and Wexner allegedly had a sexual relationship because Wexner is gay, which is pretty common knowledge, I think. So apparently Epstein was bisexual, or at least not afraid to, switch it or cut
or
from the rough or
or
play for both teams.
just kind of sociopathic and didn't really,
That
it's
could be
about
it too.
power, not even sex.
Well,
And
no,
that's
that's
the
definitely, I think, a part of it. Nick Bryan mentioned that he
Mhm,
contends that Epstein was a psychopath.
mhm. I think so, because when Jane testified that it hurt me, and I told him it hurt me, and he just kept doing it. And then there was this today, we heard from Juan that he had this yoga thing where you hung from the ceiling. And I was like, was that just a yoga thing?
Hmm.
Did you miss that? You
I
were
did
looking at me
miss
like I
that.
was
Yeah.
confused. It was just very quick. He said, and then he was describing the layout, and he's like, and then he had this yoga thing where you hung from the ceiling, and I was like, are you sure that was for Epstein? And maybe it was totally innocent,
Mm.
but in this story, everything, your eyebrows go up all the time. And
Yeah.
what do you think? I mean, we're seeing the mainstream media in court. I don't know. What do you are you reading their reporting? Are you observing them, or
The
what is?
mainstreamers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much time in the day, right? And this case has really been consuming a lot of pretty much all my work time this week, and to the point where my other kind of side projects I'm probably going to have to put on hold maybe until next year. Um, but yeah, I've read a few of it, but this is something that I learned too from Maria Farmer, is that Vicky Ward basically, when she learned that Maria had went to the FBI back in the day,
Mm.
she told Ghislaine Maxwell. And this was back when Ghislaine was a free woman and not afraid to wield her power. So she gave this story to Vicky Ward, and Vicky Ward basically betrayed her. And Vicky Ward, of course, writes and wrote for, I don't know if she still does, but Vanity Fair. She wrote the
Mhm.
2003 article, "The Talented Mr. Epstein," which is one of the more well-known exposés about Epstein, certainly way back in the day. But we were actually talking this about a little bit. I have noticed a bit of haughtiness from the mainstreamers. There was one guy from the New York Times who, you know, I don't know. It's I try to give people the benefit of the doubt whenever I can, but the mainstream media has lost that benefit of the doubt in my contention, and I don't really see the New York Times as doing a lot of great work. And that's not to say they don't still sometimes do that, but I think by and large, a lot of the public has lost trust in that, and that's why they're that's why they're going to people like yourself, Roberta, and myself.
And I'm just absolutely shocked by the interest, although there are less and less people in court as this goes on. I'm hoping that the quality of the reporting isn't going to go down. But let's go back to Elizabeth. Let's talk about Elizabeth Loftus because it's such a delightful topic. So this is a woman whose theory. So basically, I guess what the defense theory is that all these memories are corrupted. It's all just like Michael Jackson. It's all about money. And then they seem to be speaking of Maria Farmer, they seem to be fixating on Maria's sister's Annie's boots that she got from Epstein, that she kept these boots that she needed to walk. There are rattlesnakes in New Mexico. Epstein bought her these boots so she could go hiking in New Mexico, and she kept them all these years, even though she was abused by him. Why would you keep these boots? And
Sure.
the expert did an okay job. I wish they had kept that expert, the prosecution had kept that expert on for a little longer.
Yeah, she was great. She definitely knew her stuff.
And I thought that she could have been asked. I don't know if the judge had narrowed what she could testify about. That was my thinking, and that's why it was so short. I'd seen in the Nexium trial, the expert, they had a similar expert, and she was fantastic explaining how a lot of these victims keep in touch with their abuser for years, because it's like all relationships, it's a mix of good and bad, and a lot of bad and a lot of trauma, but also some positive. And these abusers are so good at pretending to make you feel special and pretending to be your advocate and your best friend. So I don't know why they're fixating on these boots. I think it's a stupid freaking argument. I think it will but
it's just one of those
Loftus,
straws that they're trying to grasp at.
good point. Yeah, Loftus, we saw her destroyed in the Durst trial. Her theories, speaking of mainstream media, were applauded by mainstream media, who's still celebrating McMartin's quote unquote and the wrongful. I mean, they were acquitted, but the wrongful accusations, quote unquote. Read Ross Chait's book, The Witch Hunt Narrative, for more on the McMartin trial. But I mean, was it a mistake, you think, for them to put on to even and hire Loftus in this case?
That's a good question. It's tough to say because and that was one of the hardest aspects, even pre-trial. It was finding jurors who weren't biased because this case is just so big. I was thinking, I was like, where did they find these people? They probably had to look under a rock or something for people that had little to no knowledge of the Maxwell Epstein case. Just looking at Loftus's background and those people that we mentioned that she has kind of testified on behalf of. It's tough to say because you're supposed to take each case on its own, right? As opposed to looking at other cases and other cases that people were a part of, and somehow having that play into the trial. But she, as far as I know, hasn't appeared yet. So I think that question probably will be more easily answered once she takes the stand. But there's a couple questions about Wexner in the chat. I don't know if we.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Roberta.
definitely answer them.
Someone asked if Wexner is a part of the mega group, and he is indeed a part of the mega group. And for those that don't know, the mega group is a group of billionaires who are also Jewish, and that's their rules for their group. That's not me describing them that way because of some bigotry. That's you have to be extremely wealthy, and you have to be Jewish, and other people in the group, a lot of famous people in that, which we can probably cover
Yeah,
maybe in another podcast if you
who
want to.
else is in that group? Just quickly, just a couple people.
I know Steven Spielberg's in it. I
Oh.
know. I want to say Rupert Murdoch might. I don't know if he's Jewish or not, but they're not right on the top of my head at the moment, Roberta. But we can definitely get deeper into that because I love discussing that. But
Mhm.
do you know, has Wexner's name been brought up in court? Somebody asked that as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's what I thought.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes, it has, and it's so funny when they go over Epstein's residences. Miami, New York City, Paris, New
yeah,
Mexico. Okay, New Mexico, Rancho, New Mexico. Then Columbus, Ohio. It's like this big question mark. Hardly the most what you would think were most sophisticated place you'd want to be in. Columbus, Ohio, Paris, Manhattan, Columbus,
yeah.
Ohio.
And
So
then
it
this
always makes
place
me
in the
laugh.
Midwest, right?
Right,
Fly
right.
over country. It's interesting you make that observation because Ohio is a really unique state. It's one of the key battleground states, right? It's a key swing state. There's a lot of corruption in Ohio. A lot of drugs go in and out of there, and
Mm.
Columbus. And I was actually talking to this guy. He used to traffic weapons for El Chapo, and he was able to escape that life, and he's now a journalist. And he contends that they use Columbus, Ohio, because it's kind of a centralized area in uh, in the United States, whereby you can get to New York, you can get to Chicago, and then the West Coast. That's covered very easily, just crossing the border from Mexico, getting those drugs up. Uh, but yeah, lots of dark stuff definitely goes on in Ohio. Obviously, the Piketon massacre was in Ohio with the Wagners and the I forgot the other family's name, but
Mhm.
that was over drugs. That was a drug beef.
Oh,
Uh,
that's the other thing is that they started bringing up is the use of drugs by Maxwell's victims, and they tried to ask the psychologists today if drugs could interfere, or alcohol and drugs could interfere with your memory. It got objected to by the prosecution, rightfully, but it's kind of funny to me for Maxwell. I think she's done this her whole life. It's just said, look, these troubled women are lying. See, they
mhm,
use drugs. They're not reliable. And I don't think that's gonna fly too much in court. Drugs have rotted your brain. You can't remember anything. It's so clear by Jane's testimony that she may get a few things confused, but sex, sexual abuse is not something you forget.
right,
Um,
right, right.
so
Yeah, and the abuse itself can distort memories in insofar as people will sometimes repress that. But yeah, I mean,
mm,
remembering minute details about I think it was 2 days ago they were trying to get her to remember the exact number of the house of or one of the houses that Epstein stayed at where she would go to visit him, and she was able to remember the street name, which I
mhm.
thought was significant. But it's like remembering the exact number 2 decades later is like, is that really disproving that this
Right.
happened, or
Was
it,
that the mansion, the most expensive? Was that the mansion that, or was that a different apartment he
I
was
don't
at?
recall which residence
Uh-huh,
it was
yeah.
exactly. There's another question here. Was there eye
Sure.
contact between Ghislaine and the jury? Did you see that?
She has this kind of 1,000-yard stare. She was staring at Jane, the victim, during the break a lot. People were noting that on Tuesday.
Yeah, I did see
And
that. Yeah.
I don't know, and Jane was physically like moving away from her. I felt badly for her. It must be awful to try. She puts on this persona that she's like a paralegal on her own case, not a defendant. Sometimes she's taking a lot of notes and talking to her very with much animation to her lawyers sometimes, and other
Mhm,
times she has this uh, Silence of the Lambs kind of look, like no blinking, mask
mhm,
fully on,
mhm,
very frozen look. She vacillates. Her her mood seemed to vacillate wildly, or her demeanor. Sometimes
Yeah.
she's kind of natural, and other times she's very frozen and
One
wide-eyed
lady
and
I talked
looking.
to said she
What do you
thought she
think?
was well, I think that's a good observation, Roberta. I was just gonna say one lady that she told me she thought, at the time, I think this was I wanna say it was either yesterday or 2 days ago, that she was being kind of, almost seductive with the way she was posturing, for a short period of time there, which I found interesting. But yeah, I did notice that her taking notes and stuff. But I think it lends maybe some credence to the idea of court as theater, right? If she can
Mm.
portray confidence to the jury and almost not maybe not arrogance, but kind of a confidence that she's going to get acquitted. That may help to persuade them, even maybe subconsciously, whereby, well, if she doesn't look too worried, maybe she knows that she's innocent, or that she feels sure about the fact that she may or should get acquitted.
Do you think this is what I've heard. I had another journalist on Monday predict that if Maxwell gets convicted, she might get 10 years. If she's convicted, what do you think? This judge seems very defense friendly. She's granting a lot of their objections. I would say more than half of their objections are granted. What would you say? At least today,
Today, yeah, yeah.
maybe
It's tough
more.
to say. It was my impression that she was sustaining more objections for the prosecution, at least
Mm.
earlier this week. Today, I can't really say definitively, but towards the latter half of the day, definitely. When I think it was Polyuka who was objecting the most this afternoon, which she did sustain quite a bit. You know what I thought was kind of weird is, do you remember when it was the prosecution, they were asking the driver slash house manager, Mr. Alessio, Juan Alessio, to look in the black book for Sarah Kellen's name, and then they Polyuka objected, Judge Nathan sustained, and then I think they went to a sidebar, and then when they came back, they just didn't discuss Sarah Kellen again. uh, I thought that
Right,
was kind of
because they
weird.
threw it out. They said, "No, you can't do that."
Mhm.
And he goes, I've read that it's this book, this instruction book, they're talking about the instruction book from Maxwell is 2005. It made the prosecution look very amateurish. Have a good question written. I don't know if there's so many of them. I know they're overworked, but have a good question for Juan Alessio to date the book. That's not that. And think about those possible objections that could be coming, to say
Mhm.
that this is there a way that you can ask a question. What they wanted to do was tell the jury that this book came after 2002, and he says, I'm reading right here, it's 2005. Objection sustained. So I don't know if it even matters that much when these books are written. He's seen a book like this. They Maxwell kept making these kind of instruction books and bossing the staff around. I hope the prosecution gets it together, because if Maxwell walks, what do you think the public
That's a good
response would
question.
be?
There's definitely going to be outcry. I would say almost certainly outrage, certainly from some people. Uh, you know, even if even if she does get convicted, I don't. This can't end with her, as I mentioned before. It's got to be those other co-conspirators. This is potentially the biggest trial in the history of the United States in terms of the people involved. Certainly in terms of the power involved, I would say it is. But yeah,
I would.
it's
I
yeah.
mean,
Go
do you
ahead.
think Jesse Smollett's trial? It seems like he's getting just as much coverage, or maybe a little less, but which
Yeah,
is it's a fun trial, but it's certainly not as significant socially.
yeah. It's
What would
tough
it?
for me
What?
to say because I've had such tunnel vision with this trial this week. I have taken a peek a bit at what the big outlets are saying, uh, but yeah, it's tough to say. Certainly, the Rittenhouse trial got way more shine. What helped with that is it was the state prosecuting, right? So it was uh, television cameras were allowed in the room, which that certainly helped. But I think either way, it seemed much more of a desire to cover that than this one.
I think I just spelled that Manuel, but manual, whatever. It's called. The book is called Household Manual. I'm going to wrap this up. What does you think there's anything else that we missed, or any other really good questions that we didn't? I'm sure we missed some good questions, but that we should answer before we go.
She said, "What is the name of the book?"
Yeah, it's called Household Manual. I think I
Okay.
spelled Manuel, but you know what I mean.
Okay.
Did I spell it? I don't know, but my spelling's terrible. But yeah,
And
that's
then
what it's
what
called.
about the jurors that were all missing? Did they just replace them all? They figured that out on Monday. It was kind of interesting because Nathan actually called the place of work of the one juror to ask for more time off, which at first I thought was pretty suspicious. But I talked to Inner City Press's Matthew Russell Lee, and he said that's happened before in a case he's covered. So not unheard of, uncommon, but not unheard of. So they did sort out the jurors, but again, that was one of the more difficult aspects pre-trial was getting a good jury set.
Oh, you're a great guest. I
Yeah, thank you,
agree.
Roberta. I really
We got to
appreciate
do
it.
this more often. So, how long are you going to be? You were originally you live in a different state.
Yes,
So how long are you going to be in New York covering this? The whole trial, or some of it, or?
I'm gonna. I think I'm gonna try to be here as long as I can. It's working out lodging and my expenses is going to be the most difficult part of this because I'm independent and it's not like I get paid no matter what. Like a lot, like these big outlet people, a lot of them just kind of get paid to stand around. So if people want to help me out, if I could do a plug, with
Yeah,
your
go
permission,
ahead. I'm
Roberta.
going to put my Patreon up there too. Just even the subway fare is $2.75 to go there. Too, it's $5.50 a day, so $85 a week just to get there.
Yeah,
So
get the
it gets
pass though. Get the
expensive.
1 week pass. It's still ridiculously expensive. My cousin lives here, and I think it's $33 a week. So that's like
Yeah.
what $132 a month to use the subway. Uh, it's insane how ridiculous New York is. So if people want to help Roberta and myself out, it'd be. Are you local or?
Yeah. I live
Okay.
here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Hmm.
And yeah, if you want to check out my Twitter too, that's actually where you'll get
So,
the most updates from me. The quickest
uh-huh.
updates at one Addy Adds, ONEADDYADDS. And if you don't want to do a Patreon, you can do $1 a month Patreon. But if you want to do a one-time PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, that works as well too. And I do have a YouTube, which I think I made a comment on earlier. I'll do another one real quick. But as I mentioned before, I usually get whacked off YouTube pretty
What
quickly,
did you say
unfortunately.
that got you whacked off? Do you know
That's a good
particularly?
question. It's a lot of the coverage of the Epstein stuff, coverage of election stuff as well.
Oh, that'll
Um,
do it.
Certain guests I've noticed, and certain topics like 9/11 as well. But yeah, it's tough to say. It seems somewhat arbitrary, Roberta, at times, because I re-uploaded all the videos from my first channel and they got flagged, but different videos, and I uploaded pretty much the same library, so they flagged me again, but it was like completely different videos that got flagged there. So yeah, it's a question that everyone always asks me, and I tell them generally what the topics are that get covered, but as
Hmm.
far as like the specific videos or whatnot, it seems to be a bit of a moving target or moving goalpost with what you can
Yeah.
and cannot say, right?
Say,
So
yeah, I haven't. I just didn't monetize because they've already ready. They put a QAnon warning on one of my videos, had nothing to do with QAnon, and
no.
it took multiple emails to get this fact QAnon thing off of it. It,
Mm.
I mean, multiple, long time, took a couple weeks, three
Wow,
or four
wow.
weeks to get it off, and of course, it bothers me because everything I say, I mean, I'm talking about court cases from the court records. You
Mhm.
know, I know, and I know it gets even more pressure when you're talking about really controversial subjects like 9/11. So, Addy, I'll see you in court tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Roberta. I really
All right.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really
Ciao.
appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, you're off.